Good evening. It's hard to believe that this is the last night of the gospel meeting. I want to get a few housekeeping things out of the way. I really appreciate, number one, you all asking me to come back. I mean, you suffered through me for like 7.5 and 8 years, and I don't know if it's, well, maybe he's gotten better. Let's try it again. I don't know if that was it or what it was. If you'd hit the bottom of your list, and I guess it's Tony's turn again. I don't know. But thank you for trusting me to come back and to preach this week. It is always something that I tell people I do not take lightly. Even though I joke around a little bit and kid, I do not take the responsibility lightly of preaching the gospel. I appreciate so much your giving me probably in every lesson an extra 20 minutes than what I normally preach. I normally do not preach this long, but I'm also trying to pack in about 11 sermons within 7 time slots. And so there's a lot of information that I've been trying to get through. Some of it probably could have been cut out, but honestly, most of it is needed to kind of, build on what we were building on. Trying to poke holes in evolution, trying to defend God's word, that God did what he said he did. And so I appreciate the time that you've given me. Nobody has complained, at least to me. And so if you have complained, it's been to other people, so thank you for that. But I really appreciate you being patient with me and giving me that time. I appreciate everyone who has, not only on Sunday afternoon, fixed meals or whatever, but have had me in their home. It was wonderful to go out to Darren and Missy's on Monday and to get to catch up with them and Dale being there as well. And just to get to catch up. I miss you guys so much, and it's just good to get to catch up. Being out at Jeff and Kim's and getting to hang out with Wesley a little bit is just so rejuvenating for me. To be able to hang out with the Halls, that was probably the place that felt most like home, with all the kids running around and screaming and wanting to sit on your lap, and just loved it. And I appreciate Trenton and his work that he is doing here, because every place you go, if you're a preacher, and you'll see this someday, you leave a piece of yourself there. And so I think about you guys all the time. I pray about you guys all the time. And it's just good to come back. It's good to know that someone is here that is preaching sound doctrine and is taking care of you all. It makes me feel good, comfortable, confident to be able to do that. And then, of course, to spend some time with Carl and Bonnie tonight. And it's just so many memories in that house, and out there on the basketball court, and on the back porch, just eating and having dinner. And he reminded me of a couple of instances where, everybody's out there and people have got their guitars and you playing piano and just out there singing and having a good time. Just so many floods of memories that come back. And so thank you guys so much, because, and I don't want to downplay somebody taking me out to eat, but this is the first time in a long time that nobody took me to a restaurant. That everybody that I saw had me in their home. There's something intimate about that. There's something important about that. And I really appreciate that. And again, not that I downplaying somebody taking me out for a dinner, but there's just something a little more intimate about, every single person had me in their home. And I truly appreciate that and the hospitality. I know that my dad had said he really wished Mom would have rushed back there and signed up so he could have gotten a meal this week, but it just didn't happen. But thank you all for doing that. I don't know if you all drew the short straws or what, but it has been a rejuvenating week for me to be here, because this is home, and it always will be home. Please turn with me to Psalm chapter 19. Psalm chapter 19. We've talked about evolution this week. We've talked about days versus ages of creation and whether or not the earth is 4.6 billion years old or whether it's about 6,000 years old. And we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about God creating. We've talked about dinosaurs. We've done a lot to, I think, combat the best we can evolution and to promote God and what he said he did. Created the world in 6 literal days about 6,000 years ago. Tonight's lesson will be a little different because there's a little different focus that I want to take tonight. And that is, if you've preached long or if you've been a Christian and you've tried to talk to people who don't believe in God or maybe are questioning their belief in God, one of the things that people will say is, I just wish that God would speak to me. I just wish that, and we'll say, take the Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, that he speaks to us through his Son. And so, that's the way that God speaks to us. And they will say, I wish that he would speak to me in another way other than the Bible. Well, I'm here to tell you that he's trying. He's screaming to you that he exists. Look at Psalm 19, and we're going to start in verse 1. A psalm of David. He begins, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Do you see that? Do you understand? Do you grasp what David is trying to say here? The heavens are telling the glory of God. They are speaking to you. In fact, God is screaming to you that he exists. In verse 2, day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. He says you can go out and hear God, see God speaking to you every single day. You can go outside your house at night and look up in the night sky, and God is screaming that he exists. I am here. I created you. But notice what verse 3 says. There's no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is a bridegroom coming out of its chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run its course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them. And there is nothing hidden from its heat. And then he begins to change here in verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. This lesson was actually inspired by Mark, who was here a few days ago. Mark Hatfield, he was teaching a class on Psalm 19. And I just started looking at some of these things and saying, God is trying to talk to us. He is trying to speak to us. But if we can go outside and do what this psalm says, hear the glory of God in what he has created, the whole point is, starting in verse 7, the law of the Lord is perfect. The testimony of the Lord is sure. The precepts of the Lord are right. The commandment of the Lord is pure. The point is, God tells you through that he exists, and we looked at, even within our own bodies, he's telling us, you have a creator. We can look outside and say, you have a creator. But the point that David is trying to make is, if that creator is real, if the person who created the sun and the moon and the stars, everything that you see in the night sky, the heavens declaring the glory of God, if that God is real, then you have issues if you're not following the law of the Lord. the testimony of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the commandment of the Lord. In 1977, August 20th of 1977, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are sent from Earth and basically programmed to go explore the world. In 1990, on Valentine's Day, in 1990, Voyager 1, kind of about 3.7 billion miles away, does this little turn and faces back toward the place that it came and snaps a quick photo before returning on its mission. And this is that photo that was taken. It's basically the earth swallowed up in the sun's light. What an amazing photo this is. But Carl Sagan, again, a prominent atheist, calls this photo that has been shown for years and years and years. But when he saw it in 1990, he named it, and people still call it this, the pale blue dot. And basically what Carl Sagan says is, when he saw this picture, he saw how insignificant man is. I mean, in the vast universe that is created, and of course he doesn't believe that God created, but in this vast universe that we have, to see this as the home in which we live, he said, we are nothing. I don't know how he sees that in that picture. You know what I see? Yes, I see a minuscule planet. Why does God love us so much? There's all these other things out in this world, out in this universe, but that pale blue dot is where God's attention and focus is. On you and on me. I don't see something insignificant. That pale blue dot is the most important thing to God, because His creation, the creation that He made in His own image, is on that planet. In Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 18, again, we've read this over and over this week. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who, again, please notice, he says, suppress the truth. Not that they don't have access to it, not that they don't know it, not that they don't realize it, they suppress it. They suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. You can look in a mirror and see that you have a creator. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power, His divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. From the beginning of creation, since creation, God has been evident to man. Not billions of years after, from the beginning, because man was in the beginning. And so I want to look at some things that the Bible reveals about our planet. So I'm going to take you through 3 science classes tonight. And again, there won't be quite as sciencey, I don't think, as some of the other ones that we have gone through this week. But our planet sits in what is called a habitable zone. And not only does it sit in a zone where this is if you see on the picture, that green space is the only space where any sort of life could exist in our solar system. I know they keep checking other places, right? But they know, they've admitted, I mean, this is them. This is not me. This is them saying we live in this habitable zone, where if you would go just about 5 to 10% closer to the sun, basically if you get beyond 10, the planet is basically going to be heat. But even if you get just 5 to 10% closer, all of the water that we have evaporates, right? What's very important for us to live? Water, right? We need it to survive. If you pull about 5 to 10% back, right, even within that little zone that we're talking about, you pull 5 to 10% back, and now it's too cold. Basically, all of the water that we have is going to turn into ice. But ice so cold, you ever tried to stick, please don't kids, but if you ever tried to stick your tongue or something, or even wet your finger and put it on something that is extremely cold, like ice, is it fun to try to pull it off? No. That would be our entire world, right? We couldn't drink that water because it would be too cold to even touch. And again, some people will say, how lucky are we? And not only is it in the right place, but it is the exact right size. If it were any bigger, the magnetic force of the earth would be too big and nothing could live on the earth. But if it were any smaller, the magnetic shield wouldn't be big enough to protect us from things that were coming, as well as where it sits. The outer planets are a wonderful shield for our planet, right? Any of the things that are coming in that would be very harmful to our planet are typically taken up by those larger planets on the outer ring. They pull them right in and slam into those planets so that it doesn't slam into ours. It's a Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It is just right. It's not too big. It's not too small. It is just right. Do you hear God screaming at you? That kind of stuff does not happen by chance. There are so many things that need to happen for life to be able to exist on a planet. And what science has determined is that there are about 20 things that make a planet habitable for complex life. And one of them is a stretch. But to get all 20 of them together, the probability is 1/100th of a trillionth probability that all of that could come together. So what we would need as far as probability is concerned is about 1,000 more billions of galaxies that we have now. The percentage is so minute that it is not a statistical improbability, it is a statistical impossibility. A statistic so low that it's not even worth mentioning, that all 20 of these things would come together by happenstance. Science agrees with that. Remember what we said earlier about the hero of evolution? It's time. Well, I suppose if you had enough time, anything's possible. Right? If I say, I'm going to flip heads 10,000 times in a row, well, statistically, it's impossible to do that. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to try for 4.6 billion years, then somebody's going to go, well, I guess in 4.6 billion. No, it's still, every time you flip it, it's still a statistical impossibility no matter how much time you give it. But what is true is that God is a God of creation. Again, in Job 26 and verse 7, and I believe we looked at this earlier this week. Job 26 and verse 7, he stretches out the north over empty space and hangs the earth on nothing. Again, the greatest scientific minds of the day, and the BCs mostly, believed that the earth was sat on the back of some gigantic animal out in space that you just couldn't see. We figured out much later that as you look at it with the naked eye, it looks like the earth hangs on nothing. Well, God knew that in Job 26 and verse 7. And in about 1650, that's when man said, oh, God's probably right. The earth hangs on nothing. If you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and again, anytime we read these things, like Job, this was not his point, but he makes the point. Notice Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 7. All rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. He's talking here about the water cycle, is he not? You see this continual flow from a river into an ocean. But yet, does the ocean level rise and rise and rise and rise and rise? No, why not? Because the water, as it heats up, evaporates, goes into the sky, becomes clouds, it rains, it goes back into the river, right? That's what he's explaining in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 7, is our water cycle. But the earth's water cycle wasn't discovered until the 1600s, when people realized there should be more water in the oceans. Why isn't there? Oh, it's because the water evaporates up into the air, it forms these clouds, it then rains, and goes back to the place where it came from. But God knew it all along. In Amos chapter 9 and verse 6, the one who builds his upper chambers in the heaven and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth, he who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth, the Lord is his name. God created that cycle, so of course he knows what it is. Yet science figures it out and they think that they've done something great. They've only confirmed what God had already told us hundreds of years before. And so many more things could be talked about. The paths of the sea that we mentioned, the first and second laws of thermodynamics that we've already mentioned. Our world is so perfect that it had to come from a creator. Let's go on to biology. There's quite a bit of evidence, as we read from Romans chapter 1, there's quite a bit of evidence that can be known simply because of what God has made. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. And so let's just take a moment to look at some things really within ourselves that screams that God is real. In Leviticus chapter 17, Leviticus chapter 17 and verse 11, it says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." Now, again, this is not necessarily his point. He's talking about blood atonement. He's talking about the sacrifices that Israel will make. But he says, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood by reason of life that makes atonement." The reason that God wanted blood for blood to make atonement for sin, is because blood is what is life to us. Do you realize what your blood does for you? I mean, it carries all of the nutrients that we need to every single cell in our body. If we do not have blood, we die. God tells us in Leviticus 17 and verse 11, your life is in the blood. Do you remember the days of bloodletting? What people thought, what doctors thought? They said, well, there must be some infection in the blood, and so let's make some cuts and let's get some of that blood out of there. No. Right? We know that now. But the brightest minds in our world, if they would just have maybe read Leviticus chapter 17 and verse 11, they would have maybe said, you know what? blood is life. Our life is in the blood. Maybe we don't need less. Maybe we need more. God knew. But William Harvey in 1616 discovered this principle, that life is in the blood, even though it was there all along. We looked earlier this week at the law of biogenesis, that life can only come from life, and that life can only come from its own kind. Go to Genesis chapter 1. As God is creating the world, notice everything. Starting in verse 11, Genesis chapter 1. Then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth, bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. You know what you won't get if you plant an apple tree? An orange. Or anything else for that matter. You are going to get an apple. And not just an apple. I realize we can, kind of maybe adjust and change some things and get some different kinds of apples sometimes, but it's always going to be an apple. That's the rule that God set forth. That's why it cringes. I get hairs that stand up on the back of my neck, and I want to scream when somebody tells me of their child or of their grandchild, they're just sowing their wild oats. What are you going to get if you sow wild oats? If you plant wild oats, what do you think is going to spring forth? It ain't going to be an apple. It's not going to be an orange. It's not going to be any kind of fruit. What you are going to get if you're sowing your wild oats is a wild oat. That's the law that God put forth, not me. That's the law that God put forth. You get what you plant. What you plant is what you're going to reap. We need to be planting those good things. In verse 21 of Genesis chapter 1, God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. From the beginning of creation, God said, no, I'm not going to give you one thing and it's going to evolve into many things. No, I'm going to give you one thing. I'm going to create this thing and it's going to continue. One male, one female. You need both. And it's going to continue to give you that thing. Now, might there be some changes along the way? Yeah, God programmed that in there. If you have a dog and that dog survives better in the winter when it has longer fur or thicker fur, you're going to find that the thicker fur animals are going to survive better. And so you're going to get dogs with thicker and thicker fur, right? Because the male and the female are both going to have thicker fur, and they're going to have children that have thicker fur and all of those things. Yes, there are slight changes that can be made, but it is always going to be a dog. When two cats get together, one male and one female, and it has to be that way, you're always going to get a cat. It could be a calico-looking cat. It could be a black cat. It could be a white cat. But it is always going to be a cat. That's God's law. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. You are only going to get what you start with. That's God's law. It's always going to be, if you want to have a child, it's going to be a male and a female. You're not going to have two males. You're not going to have two females. It is always going to be a male and a female that has that child after its kind. And that child is always going to be in the image of God. It can't be anything else. It is founded in Genesis, the importance of life. Last, let's go to astronomy. Let's go beyond our earth, where our earth sits. Not only does our earth sit in relationship to the sun in a habitable zone, but our sun sits in a habitable zone in our galaxy. So again, if you go outside of the galaxy or inside of this safety zone that's in green around there, it is not a place where life could exist. If you get too close to the center, you're swallowed up in a black hole. If you get too close to the outer edge, then there's not enough elements there to sustain life. God put us in the perfect place. Or, billions of years ago, it just accidentally happened that way. What makes more sense to you? And I know I'm speaking to the choir, but to me it just makes more sense. Consider the stars that we can look out again at the night sky and see. Look at what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 41. He says, "There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for star differs from star in glory." Now, again, this is Paul writing this. And at the time that Paul is alive, they don't have the kind of technology that we have today where they can really, look at the night sky and see what the stars really are. If you look out in the night sky, could you tell me which one was bigger and which one was smaller? I mean, they all kind of look the same, don't they? When you look with the naked eye. How does Paul know every star differs in size? That information has to get there somehow, right? Really, up until a few hundred years ago, there were those who thought all of the stars were the same size because they looked the same size with the naked eye. But notice Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 22. He says, "As the host of heaven cannot be counted and the sand of the sea cannot be measured, so I will multiply the descendants of David my servant and the Levites who minister to me." Now, Jeremiah is representing this idea that God puts forth basically to Abraham, saying that your descendants that come after you are going to basically be as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the ground. Now, at best, we can see somewhere between 2,000 and 4,500 stars. Is that innumerable? At best, you will see in the night sky somewhere, at best, you will see about 1,500 of them at one time. Really can't see. There's 400 within our eye shot, but most of the time during the day, we can't see them, right? Because it's too bright out. So we can't see those ones. The ones we can see at night, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 that we can just see with our naked eye. Now, that's a lot, and it looks like a lot. But does that compare to the sands of the sea? Not even close. So how does Jeremiah know that there is a correlation between the stars in the sky and the sand in the sea? Other than God letting him know that. Because we don't figure that out till much later in human history. In 1543, a man named Nicholas Copernicus proposed this theory that the earth actually revolved around the sun instead of the sun revolved around the earth. And it took about 100 years or so for it to become accepted. And it really wasn't confirmed until 1838. But in Luke chapter 17, when this day comes, and again, this admittedly might be a stretch here, but look at Luke 17 and verse 34 through 36. He says, I will tell you on that night, there will be two in one bed, one will be taken and the other will be left. There will be two women grinding at the same place. One will be taken, the other left. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. So right now what we have as Luke is trying to explain this is we have people asleep in bed at night. And at the exact same time, we have women grinding at the mill and two men working in the field. The two men aren't going to be working in the field if it's dark. And so you have night and day at the same time, which we still have night and day at the same time. They're just on opposite ends of the world, of the earth. Most people during this time felt that if it was night here, it was also night everywhere else on earth, in the world. And that's not the case. And it seems that Luke kind of explains that to us a little bit. I will tell you this, so much more could be said. Every lesson that we looked at this week, and I told you is probably 11 packed into 7. But every lesson that we looked at this week, I could have spent the whole week on that one particular lesson. There's so much more information. But I hope that the point is proven. And I hope that we don't forget the purpose of why we're here. It is not just to confirm that, yes, the world is 6,000 years old. It is not to confirm that, yes, God created the world in 6 literal days, just like he said he did. That's part of the process. But again, as I said, you would hear over and over again, if I convince you of that, if you came in here thinking the world was billions of years old, and now you believe that God created it in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, but you don't come to Christ, I've lost. I've not done my job, because that is the important part. That's why we go over all of these things, to say, oh, hey, God is real. And if God is real, just like we looked at in Psalm 19, then the law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. It is all pointing back to the law. The testimony of the Lord is true, making wise the simple. Simple. That's what God can do for us. But the whole purpose is not just to say, hey, we know a little bit of science, and we believe there's a lot of proof, a lot of evidence that God did what he said he did. No, our job is to convert people to Christ. And I would love for you to do that tonight. There's so much more that can be said about the beauty and God's glory in what he has created. If you have not ever gotten an opportunity to go to a total solar eclipse, if you get a chance before you die, go do it. Because what I will tell you is that there is no other place in the known universe where that happens. Not only did God put us in the perfect habitable zone, but he put us in the perfect place to view the outside world, all of which I believe was to confirm that he exists and that he is our creator. The sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's also 400 times further away. And so the moon, when there's a full total solar eclipse, fits perfectly. They look like they're the exact same size. God did that so that we could see that, we could witness that, and all of the amazing things that happens when it does. All of that beauty is to declare the glory of God. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. but it is all to confirm God's word. Do not worship the creature. Worship the Creator. And God is your Creator. If you're here tonight and you're not a child of God, I would encourage you to become one tonight, because that's the point of all week, is to get us to see that if there is a God that can create this world which we see, I don't want to fall into his bad side. Right? The Bible tells us that it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. But I also know what a comfort it is to walk into those same hands. I haven't picked on Carl yet, and I'm about to. When I was working with Carl, we would put scaffolding up, and as you're walking on that scaffolding, typically when I was striking joints or whatever at the end of the day, as we're trying to clean up stuff and I'm striking joints, I would do it this way, and I'm walking and walking and walking. And you have to put the planks kind of over top of each other in some places. And they're just, it's an inch, right? An inch or 2 inches. That as you're walking backwards and you step over that 1 inch, it is a terrifying moment in that 1 inch, because you think you're going down, right? You think you're going to travel the whole way of the scaffolding because of that one little inch. But you know, if you turn around and you see it, it's not that scary. It's not frightening to drop 1 inch. God's hands work similarly. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God if you're not expecting it. What I'm encouraging you to do is walk into them today. Be baptized into the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will not regret it. If you're here and you're a child of God who has once done that, but maybe forgotten the glory of God, it's time to get back. It's time to be faithful again. We're here to pray with you. We're here to pray for you. If you're here and subject to God's calling anyway, please come have a front seat as we stand and as we sing.